has joined us. The whole team from Albuquerque has joined us. Sherry, who's the manager of the Public Art Urban Enhancement Division for the city of Albuquerque, will give us a little bit of insight into what her team is doing on the other side of the country. So after that, as I said, we can open it up to questions. And really, your questions and thoughts are crucial to these conversations, both from the standpoint of ensuring that those of you working hard to get up to speed on these issues have an opportunity to ask the questions, and also because I think that the thinking on all of these issues is developing at such an incredibly fast pace. It's really important to have that Q&A opportunity in order to explore new ideas and hopefully eventually solidify confident positions so that we can all move forward in our various jobs in developing these policies. Okay, so let's get started with the content. I can get my slides to move. So AI in the arts actually started attracting attention well before blockchain and NFTs exploded. Don't worry, we're not going to talk about that today. That is a totally different rabbit hole to go down. In 2018, this portrait made by AI sold at Christie's for over $400,000. So of course, as soon as money is involved, people get very excited. There was also sort of a morbid interest in how artistic and creepy these computer-generated images were, that people were really very enthusiastic about embracing these works. Okay, not sure what we're hearing now. Then again, in March of 2019, there was the self-proclaimed first solo gallery show devoted to an AI artist, which opened in Chelsea. These are a couple of images that were part of the Faceless Portraits Transcending Time exhibition, and all of them were created by an AI in collaboration with a professor at Rutgers, Dr. Ahmed Al-Gamal, who, in addition to being an artist, founded an art and artificial intelligence laboratory. So what we're seeing is, the beginnings of real interest within the marketplace for AI, and of course, the development of these generative engines, which are really creating all the challenges today. So artificial intelligence is actually not that new as a concept. It was first conceived of and advanced in the 1950s by a number of brilliant scientists, including Alan Turing. Currently, it's a relatively broad category of technology covering at least 7 different types of algorithmic models. We are not going to go through all 7 of those algorithmic models. But it is important to note that there really are a lot of different ways in which AI has been impacting all of us for years already, with search engines, social media, spell check, Grammarly, all of those things rely to some degree on AI. And AI definitely has some amazing applications in the medical field, allowing for the detection of conditions that otherwise may have gone unnoticed or untreated, as well as aiding in a lot of areas of scientific research. But as it pertains to the current hype and art, for most of us, that's what's front and center. We have a lot of issues around generative models that provide opportunities for users to either have AIs provide written responses or visual images in response to prompts. The most popular of the text generators is ChatGPT, which I imagine most of you have heard of already, though there are others out there. And undoubtedly, as the venture capital money is flowing into this area, there will be others that gain traction as well. Right now, we're seeing a lot of jockeying for position and various companies trying to achieve that primary market status, as well as developing the standards and protocols around a lot of these models. The most frequent references to image generators started off being really OpenAI's DALL-E, but now there are also models such as Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, and several others. So anybody joining, please make sure you mute your microphone so that we don't have feedback or other unpleasantries as we go forward. Okay, so generally speaking, those AI models that are trained on text are considered large language models. You'll hear that referred to as LLMs. LLMs can generate text or image outputs, but they are different in the way that they work. These models are trained on other data like images and non-text content, and those are generally considered the generative models for outputting visual content. The main feature of all of these models, and something that they all have in common, is that they are generative systems that rely on machine learning. And I think that understanding a little bit about machine learning is important to understanding the context of AI. So what does this mean? At its most basic, machine learning is the process by which computers have the ability to learn without being explicitly programmed. It's the difference between writing a program for a computer that's akin to a recipe with precise instructions for how to make a specific dish, versus having the computer watch a million hours of Iron Chef to learn how to cook and make up its own meal. And so that's sort of where we are and where both the benefits and potential scary detriments come from. Machine learning is a subset of AI, and while there are several different kinds of machine learning, I'm going to describe two broad categories so that you can see where some of these controversies arise. The first is the traditional AI model, and this is where algorithms are programmed by engineers. I will say there's like a ton of new vocabulary. Hopefully not all of this is brand new to everybody, but it is important to kind of get familiar with some of the language that's used in talking about AI. And that's something, certainly, if you're confused or having trouble with any of this, we can talk about a little bit more at the end. Anyway, so the first is a traditional AI model where algorithms are programmed by engineers and trained on large amounts of data. Over time, the algorithms learn to identify patterns and tend to operate on a linear regression or predictive analysis model, or a decision tree model. This process is heavily reliant on human by the software and amount of data input, and by relatively small, I mean thousands to hundreds of thousands of data points. And examples would be those things that we're pretty familiar with already, things like grammar recognition, spam filters, predicting traffic patterns, and actually even self-driving cars. The other broad type of machine learning is the deep learning model, which is based on a structure that is inspired by the human brain, and they're called neural networks. This type of model relies on a series of algorithms, which requires much, much more data to build. We've got millions and billions of data points as opposed to just the hundreds of thousands. And this system relies much less on human input and more on the computer actually learning itself. So the system is comprised of three main layers connected by nodes. And these layers are the input layer, which is important as we talk through how the data comes into these systems. The middle layer, which is the hidden layer, we'll talk about that as well. And then the output layer. These systems learn autonomously from errors and feedback without the input of human engineers. Most importantly, I think, in terms of understanding where the trouble arises and also where the nervousness for a lot of people arises, is the hidden layer. And it's called that because the process that the AI uses is not able to be seen. So quite obvious, I suppose. The hidden layer works based on weights that control the strength and direction of connections. And the process that the AI uses in developing and applying these weights is not visible to engineers or users. And you're not able to really reverse engineer the output in order to figure out what is involved in this hidden layer. This creates challenges in addressing issues such as bias, and we'll talk a little bit about bias later. I know Kerry has some things to say about that as well. And the challenge here is that if we can't really see how the computer is weighting certain information, we can't necessarily understand easily how to control or correct for that bias. So examples of neural network AIs would be image classification, fraud detection, image generation, which is mainly what's going to concern us within the arts, but there are, of course, broader considerations, and then customer service chatbots as well. In any event, both types of machine learning do rely on algorithms. And of course, algorithms identify patterns based on the ingestion of large amounts of information. So a machine learning algorithm is a set of rules that guides a set of procedures. In machine learning, the algorithms learn to identify patterns based on the ingestion of large amounts of data. And of course, now the gardeners are here and there's a lot of noise in the background. Let me see if I can get the windows closed here. Okay. It's always right when you're in the middle of presenting that the gardeners show up, of course.
We don't hear
Okay,
them,
so rather
Sarah.
than create,
You sound fine.
oh, good. I'm glad. I can barely hear myself with the lawnmower going, but that's okay. Okay, so rather than creating computer code instructing certain decisions like the traditional if-then programming that we're more familiar with, the machine learning programs create a matrix of information from which the computer then constructs the algorithms, which become more sophisticated the more information is gathered. The information that's fed into the algorithm is called training data or data sets. And we'll hear this talked about a lot in terms of trying to figure out what is contained in the data sets. And that's where artists' concerns tend to be, because those data sets are often made up of copyright protected content. Once a machine learning algorithm has been trained, then you have a machine learning model. Once it's been found that these models, often it has been found that these models have inherent biases based on the content of the data set used for the learning process. So when you think about the fact that it's scraping the internet for all the data points, you can imagine all the garbage that's being pulled in along with stuff that's maybe not garbage. You also have no distinction between that information which is protected by copyright and that which is in the public domain. Programmers can sometimes tweak the algorithms to account for some of the bias, though again, we've got these hidden weights within that hidden layer. But there's no getting around the fact that at least the makeup of the content of the training set lays the foundation for the AI's knowledge. And I will also note that some people vary with the computer machine learning process. I'm not really sure how to get around that, so I'm just going to go ahead and use these terms, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I think of the computers as human and actually capable of learning the way humans do. But that's the philosophical layer of this whole conversation is, at what point do we have to be concerned about computers being able to think like humans and or developing consciousness? Again, conversation for another day, I think. Uncurated data that is scraped from the internet. Okay, so ultimately, it's these kinds of models that are the AI platforms that people are using to generate content. And while there is no question that there's a fascination with the capabilities of both the LLMs, which provide text, and the image generators, which generate the visual content, people are enjoying experimenting with both of these systems. But some of this excitement will inevitably wear off, probably not before the technology companies have taken over the universe, but we do need to kind of get past the novelty and gimmick aspects before we can really recognize the powerful tools that are being offered here for creative expression, efficiencies in production, and exploring all kinds of aspects of our world. And of course, the ability to affordably create works that otherwise might not have been possible. So there is obviously a lot of interest and energy around this right now, but we do need to sort of think toward the future and think past this exciting moment. President Biden, some of you may know, issued an executive order last year. And while on the one hand, this really signals that there's encouragement from the highest levels of government for everyone to hurry up and use AI everywhere, it didn't really address a lot of the issues that I think are becoming big concerns as we develop policies. While it's not all bad, it is important to understand that there are several different categories of concerns when it comes to the generative models that can largely be placed into two buckets, and we'll talk about those briefly. There's the input issues and the output issues. First, let's take a look at the input issues. As I mentioned a few minutes earlier, algorithms learn through the ingestion of large amounts of data. So generally speaking, there are two ways to feed content into an AI algorithm. There's scraping the content, which means gobbling up anything that can be gathered off the web in whole or in part. Some of this content, as I mentioned, is copyrighted. Some has metadata attached, meaning that there are tags describing what's in that content. Some of it is wrong, and some of it is correct. Basically, there's no judgment exercised in what's ingested when you use this scraped content method, and no rights are cleared, compensated, or even noted. And I don't mean this slide at all to be insinuating that Hieronymus Bosch is participating in this. It just was a great image of a lot of different content. So those not so happy with this process assert that the process is inappropriately copying the intellectual property of others. This is a really big question, and it's not obviously limited to published books or images. It's really any content at all that can be found may be protected. Those advocating for the unencumbered advancement of AI liken the training process to people reading books or visiting museums and galleries to see art that then influences and inspires them in their own artistic endeavors. I think we can agree that that's one position, and of course the other position is this is wholesale stealing and content is being gobbled up and used inappropriately. So one big question is machine learning the same as humans looking at art? Then there's also intentionally constructed data sets. And in this situation, those who are gathering the data sets are carefully selecting content that is licensed, it exists in public domain, or it's completely original content for which consent of the artist is not an issue. So this would be, a highly regulated process that is going to be much different from the scraping method, and it does allow for there to be a little more thought that goes into not only what content is used, but how artists are involved in that process or other content creators, and whether there is a compensation model that can work. The problem, as mentioned before, is that much of this activity is going on inside a black box, meaning that unless the AI platform uses either an open source model where anyone can look at the code, which is difficult because even with the open source models, that middle layer remains hidden. Meaning that, that unless the AI platform uses the open source model where anyone can look at the code, most of the generative AI platforms are neural networks, and so there's a limited ability to see what's going on inside. And this black box issue is a challenge not only for users, but for the creators of these models as well. So it's not just a matter of not understanding or not knowing enough information. It's a matter of that's the way these models work. Currently, there really aren't any standards or protocols that establish the way of obtaining content on which the machine learning happens. Obviously, copyright law still applies, other intellectual property law still applies, but there's a lot of space between what is being done, what's being regulated, how do we enforce things. And the reason why I think some of this is really overwhelming is that this is an area of law and technology that is evolving at an incredibly rapid pace, and there's a lot of room for new thinking to happen, and we really do need to have those standards and protocols established. The question is going to be, of course, who is going to establish those and how do they gain traction within the wider community? There are questions as to whether the practice of employing the scraping method is engaging in copying in violation of rights, and of course, these issues are currently being litigated in courts across the country. I think as of this week, there are 30 lawsuits alleging unlawful infringement, and those are working their way through the system, one case at a time. And frankly, given the status of the courts right now in the Supreme Court makeup right now, there are some concerns about how that's going to be ultimately determined. Some solutions that we might think about would be, for instance, requiring transparency in the machine learning algorithms and the data sets that are being used to train so that we can actually see what's happening. Obviously, there are some issues there with the invisible layer. We can think about requiring opt-in instead of opt-out processes, meaning that rather than going back to ask the AI company to take your work out of the system, they would have to get you to agree to have your work included in the system in the first place. Also a little bit difficult to regulate. Only allowing training data on public domain or properly licensed works would be another standard that we could start to look toward. And then developing tools to credit and compensate artists when they do agree to have their work included in the data sets. And of course, I'm presenting this in an artist-centric way, but there's a lot of other information besides art information that could be subject to these kinds of processes. There are also issues on the output side. I would imagine by now that most of you have seen a lot of hilarious or really disturbing videos and images, as well as all of those fantastic deep fakes that we're seeing, especially with the elections coming up. So obviously there are issues on the output side. The two big questions here are whether the output is infringing on existing protected works and whether the content generated in part or in whole by the AI is protectable by the person using the AI. There's also, of course, the question of whether things are accurate and how much of the output is what we call a machine hallucination or an AI hallucination, meaning that it's absolute nonsense based on incorrect predictions that the AI is coming to. The infringement question is certainly connected to the issues on the input side, but if the AI is working with a black box model, it can be difficult to know if the reason that the AI generated work is infringing or substantially similar, if that's because it's copied protected work or that it somehow independently generated something that looks very much like a protected work. So we don't necessarily know exactly how it's getting there. And that's been one of the challenges in the lawsuits. In this example on this slide, this is an exhibit in one of the current lawsuits, the lawsuit that Getty Images filed against Stability AI. There was no question here what was used in the trading data, as the Getty image watermark was sort of partially included on the output, as well as a lot of other disturbing components here. And in this lawsuit, the Getty Images alleges that Stability AI copied 12 million images to train its AI model without permission or compensation. So you can see that the scale is pretty tremendous at this point. Further, the use of people's images for the creation of false narratives and deepfakes, again, something that we're really starting to see in earnest with the elections especially. But this is, of course, where celebrities have been very concerned about the use of their image and likeness. And there have been a lot of conversations. And of course, last year there were strikes over a lot of these issues as well. The results at this point are okay at best. They're not really definitively protecting one way or the other. I think that it's certainly a very complicated question as to how do we protect people who are creating the content and actors and other people who are very conscious about the use of their image. But one thing to remember is that the artist's style in the United States is not protectable. So we've got an even more complex layer on top of this, so that even within our current copyright protection system, you can't protect the style of an artist. And this has led to challenges for artists whose work is popular, but maybe people don't want to pay for. Solutions on this front, once again, transparency so that we can see what content was fed in that could be improperly influencing the output. The second might be adopting a federal anti-impersonation standard that protects people's images and styles by requiring that AI platforms limit the ability of algorithms to generate content in the style of or placing people in a false light. These are the kinds of legislation efforts that are currently working their way through both state and federal systems. Holding platforms responsible for any violations of public policy protecting people's likeness and style. This is a really big one. Platforms are pushing all the liability onto the users. That means programs, it means individual people. So the platforms really don't want to take any responsibility for the way in which the content is being used on the other end, which I think is not a good way to go, but that's where we're going to see some big battles. Fourth would be allowing for damages and injunctive relief for anyone harmed by the output. But again, very challenging to know how to go about enforcing any sorts of legal outcomes or injunctive relief. because these models are so complicated and it's difficult to just pull out a couple of items here and there without taking down the whole system. Finally, creating standards and tools that effectively allow for the detection of AI-generated works to be identified so that there's no question as to what kind of content is being offered and what kind of content is able to be copyrighted. This is something that we're seeing emerging, are these notions of having transparency where people are having to represent and warrant within agreements that they have not used AI or that they have used AI. And if they have used AI, in what way have they used AI? So this goes not only to trying to provide some basis for all of us to feel secure about what it is we're looking at and what it is we're working with, but it's also a way of figuring out whether the content is going to be copyrightable, because at current, AI-generated work is not protectable according to the Copyright Office. This case from 2002 or 2022 was really is the seminal case and the one that we are still referring back to. There haven't been many decisions since, a couple, but this is really the main one. This slide shows the work of artist Chris Castanova, who received a copyright registration for their comic book a couple of years ago, without disclosing that the images contained in the comic book were generated with the assistance of AI image generator Midjourney. Following Castanova's announcement on social media that they had received a registration for the entire work, including the AI images, the Copyright Office backtracked. They got very nervous and asked for further information from the artist as to the details of their authorship. After receiving the additional information from Castanova, the artist was granted registration only on the text and compilation of the comic book, but not the images. So the Copyright Office retracted protection for the images themselves. The Copyright Office, relying on a fairly long history of cases and precedents, which I would argue, again, another big conversation for another day, we need to really be examining the basis for protection of art and data at this point. I think we're going to have to really start rethinking the way in which we protect artists or not. But in this case, they're relying on pretty well-established law that despite any labor, and certainly in this case, the artist put a tremendous amount of labor into crafting the prompts that eventually resulted in the final images, regardless of any of that labor and input, the images generated by AI is not considered the product of human authorship and therefore is not copyright protectable. So that presents a lot of problems for artists who are playing with this medium. You know, there are all different ways in which it's being worked with, and I think that that's going to have to become a little bit more part of not only the conversation and what is being represented by artists and content generators, but also figuring out where that line is. How much has to be human generated? How do we define that human generated component versus the AI generated component? And how does this differ from things like photography and other digital media that we're working with in other ways? What I can say too is that in looking at AI generated artwork, well, museums and other institutions that are collecting works and having to deal with them from a collections perspective, when we were talking about blockchain-based work, it was fairly easy to slot that into existing time-based media policies and procedures because, you know, with NFTs and blockchain, we were talking about a packaging. With AI, we're talking about the actual content, the actual intellectual and conceptual underpinning of the artwork itself. So it's a very different conversation and is not going to be as easy to plug into existing policies and protocols. So again, making the conversation that much more complicated. So bottom line is the current law is that AI generated work is not protectable and automatically enters the public domain. This is, of course, concerning when commissioning bodies, whether it's a film and TV studio or public art programs, are commissioning work for which there are contemplated rights for multiple purposes. So it does create some potential challenges and things that people should not just skip by and assume that they're able to have the same rights to work with the content that they would for regular human-generated artwork. And again, we're currently requiring representations and warranties from artists as to the originality and authorship of works being delivered within a commissioning context. So we have to be very careful about how we're continuing with that requirement in the context of working with AI-generated anything, frankly. And then, of course, what happens when the artist can't rep and warrant that the work that they're creating is theirs because they've relied some or, in part or whole on AI for some of that creative process. So internationally, conversations are happening to address the need for ethics, legal standards, protocols, both within geographic boundaries, but of course, because we're talking about technology that by its nature is international, we really need to be looking at this on an international scale. As one might imagine, it's a little difficult to get consensus on these issues, but we really do need to keep trying. We're also starting to see more contractual negotiations where people are trying to hash out more equitable arrangements within a contractual process in order to properly acknowledge the use of the underlying material and the ability to move forward with proposed business models, which are being really impacted greatly by all of these reconsiderations. I think for a lot of people, the incentive is to avoid litigation. But, we also have other issues to be concerned about besides just avoiding litigation and risk management. The point is that there's currently no clear path to the regulations of these AI models, and many concerns are being pursued in the courts, legislative arenas, domestically and internationally. But there's also a lot of case-by-case transactional approach that's needing to be taken here in order to deal with these things as the policy and law around it develops. The hope is eventually that we'll have rational standards and best practices that will emerge. And even better would be if these are developed with an eye toward at least some international conformity, especially when we're dealing with digital tools. These functions and abilities are, as I'm sure you are all well aware, not neatly confined to geographic borders. And we also, of course, need to be concerned about ensuring that issues of equity are considered and concerned when we take a look at the way in which we're regulating the whole AI field. I also want to mention briefly one crucial factor that for whatever reason seems to have gone largely unmentioned, and that is the incredible environmental impact that AI has. It's currently one of the most dangerous emerging threats to climate change because of the amount of energy needed to train and run AI models. And this is something that people talked a lot about in the blockchain space, but are not talking about so much with AI. So just for a point of reference, training a single large language model can emit more than 5 times the lifetime emissions of an average American car. So that's just one model, and we've got many models that are being trained all the time. ChatGPT's daily power usage is nearly equal to 180,000 US households, and a single ChatGPT conversation uses the equivalent of 1 bottle of water. So you can imagine how much water is being used in the meantime. So AI concerns are multifaceted and urgent. And I will say that a majority of my clients right now are focused on how AI is going to impact them regardless of where they are sitting within the art world ecosystem. So I spend a lot of time now recommending to clients that they establish working groups and strategic plans to develop these AI policies and include language addressing their AI concerns within contracts and other documents that they're working with. I'm going to actually wrap it up now because I know that both Kerry and Sherry are dealing with these concerns on the ground in real time, and their organizations have some things that perhaps could be useful to the rest of us here today. So I'm going to turn it over to Kerry to start. Kerry, if you'd like to talk about what you're working on and how you're developing, let me stop sharing, what you're working on with your colleagues to address these issues.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Kerry Kennedy, and I'm also a consultant, but I work primarily for the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities. And it's a very bureaucratic organization in a very bureaucratic city. And we're also comparable, not only as the city's public art program, we're also considered a state agency. So there are a lot of rules, regulations that we are always trying to be aware of. With that, AI is a new program project where we decided we needed to look at it because we realized AI is here, as Sarah has already let us know, and folks are using it. And so we decided we needed to look at some of the policies and procedures that our office might need to have in place. So I'm going to share a screen also with our artists and our organization. And you have to give me a second, because once you try to share, you have to toggle between starting the actual slideshow and actually being able to so I may not be able to do this. Let's see. Here we go. Alrighty. Yeah. Okay. I may not be able to do what I wanted to do, which is get rid of the. There we go. All right. So another component of our office is that right now, inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility is a really big part of what the DC Commission considers a part of its mission. And so I have a background in museums, archives, research, and arts education. So when I started this research into the considerations, I thought about it in terms of the humanities, because the humanities support public art. And so what we were thinking, or what I was thinking, was the data. That's where I was able to get in. And I already knew that there was kind of a bias about data just from working in museums, working with archives, how the country and how our country studies history and how whose history is highlighted. So with AI, you have to look at attribution, citations, data, and algorithms. And again, where is the data coming from? As administrators, once we have public art projects, again, we may have some ability to support or control the data for public art projects, but everything else, AI is scraping from the entire internet. So the fact that AI is affecting, like I said, the types of attributions, citations, collections management, maintenance. If an artist incorporates AI in their project, how are they going to maintain it, protect it from hacking, what the interpretation is going to be in terms of if they're using historical information or if they're using data gathered from algorithms with the set of rules that they put in. How do you maintain a way to even pay attention and understand how that's going? Then, of course, there's bias, because again, biases are inherent in a lot of the data sets. So again, we as administrators have to be able to process and understand that. AI has the ability. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, whoever's on the phone needs to mute themselves because there's feedback.
AI has the ability to amplify accessibility, or if we are as administrators can figure out a way to use it as a tool that is reliable, that uses reliable, diverse, and inclusive data, it can increase accessibility ability. Also with performance, again, it goes back to how is this performing? It also speaks to performance art. There are just so many things. And then for our organization, we're a granting organization. But if you have commissions, how are people going to use AI in their grant applications or their proposals? Again, these were all the types of things we were considering. So the key components of the decision support system, which supports artificial intelligence or AI, are data, which again, it's without data, there's nothing for the AI to learn from and no way to train AI. So again, you're training something based on the data that you're putting in. The algorithms are the rules or the sets of rules that allow you to learn from the data, or allows the AI to learn from the data and make predictions. And those predictions are going to be the images we see produced that Sarah has shown us that artists are starting to use. Hardware, often hardware is the computer we have at work. Yeah, and if you're working for civic organizations, it's not always the most up to date. And then there's software, and the software is what allows the user to interact with the AI and use the predictions made by the AI. And that software, again, can be applied in a lot of different directions. As administrators, how could you use software? And in our office, we're looking at being able to better manage grant applications. But there are, of course, other uses. So we're looking at equity and access, copycat work, again, as people are applying for commissions or applying for grant applications. Copycat work is a problem, and AI allows people to scrape together different artists' work and present it as their own. There are also the copyright and intellectual property issues. For our organization, the artist must own the copyright. If they don't own the copyright, then theoretically, we do not award a commission. So again, these are policies and procedures we have to look at to make sure that we are honoring that. There are also privacy issues. Artists are starting to use captured imagery of people. And right now, your face is becoming a biometric tool that you can be identified with, and third-party users can use that data for targeted ads, for police surveillance. So again, these are issues you want to think about as you are working on your AI policies. And then there's misinformation. Again, our program, and I'll talk more about it later, also does memorials. As people are starting to use QR codes and thinking about creating possible projects related to memorials, you want to make sure that the information they're getting is correct. And again, in our office, when we award a commission, the artist or the organization is responsible for maintaining computer-supported technology. So again, but in our office, how are we going to track that? And are we going to track that? Those are the type of things we have to think about. Also, the artists that you're awarding commissions to, the legal considerations. We're overwhelmed with all the new legal things that are coming out. That a series of laws just came out of California, I believe, this week. And things are going to change based on that across the country. And when you award a commission, again, will your artists understand the legal considerations of copyright, privacy laws? And if they don't, how that can affect your organization. So what are your contracts looking like now? So again, these are things you want to do. Data safety again, and again, grant applications. So for copyright, AI raises fundamental questions for copyright law and policy, which many see as existential. To what extent all AI generated content replaces human authorship? And how does human creativity differ in nature from what AI systems can generate now or in the future? I think the U.S. Copyright Office has done a great job. They surveyed 10,000 people that answered. They put out a call to get to understand people's needs and understanding of AI. They have come up with a white paper, and they're going to have a series of them. And they also, as Sarah mentioned, have come up with some policy. And like she said, they've got moving targets. They've got people who are just now applying for copyrights. They've got people who applied for copyrights that they now may have to go back and look at how the copyright was awarded. But the bottom line with them seems to be it has to be human generated. So you can use AI, but AI can't be copyrighted. So again, when you write a RFA or RFP, you're going to have to define that and explain that to artists that, this is acceptable, this is copyrightable, and we either use this or we don't, or accept this or we don't. So I'm working with a colleague in my office named Kerry. So I'm going to call her Kaliba from now on. And she works on the grant side, and I work on the public art side. And one of the things that I was not considering is, because of the number of documents that are required for my grant application, there are about 35 documents that people have to do, and they have to come with a full proposal. I don't have a lot of grant applications. I usually have anywhere from 30, 35 grant applications that get started. Usually about 14 people actually finish the application, and then maybe 9, 10, 11 are actually eligible. And so public art for me as a grant program, I was more concerned about the programming side of it and the art proposal sides of it. These are some other public art grant programs that we also will be considering when we think about AI. So we have a Color of the Curb school safety program. We have juried art exhibition grants, civic projects, and then art bank program. And again, that's a different kind of copyright issue because these works are actually purchased from artists, and they are then sent throughout the district and different governmental agencies. And again, if the work's not copyrighted, that can create liabilities for our office. Working with Kerry Kaliba made things interesting, and I'll get to her in a second. But when I approached our lawyer with Kerry, and we were talking about, hey, we want to set up some policy, and is legal interested? And one of our lawyers was like, I say no AI, which we were like, okay, because it's not realistic. And I laughed because I was kind of on that boat too, but then I realized it's here. So we have to figure out ways that it's being used and have those policies. Also, Art Bank also gets hundreds of applications. So again, whereas I was interested more in programming and how the arts are actually being AIs used to create art, Kerry Kaliba and I, as I took more trainings, realized there were a lot of applications that we could use as grant managers and that AI could actually be used to help us. Some examples would be, one thing that I would love is that as people are applying for grants, if they don't have the appropriate mandatory document, AI automatically, as soon as they upload it, says, hey, this is not one of the documents you have to have is clean hands. So this is not a clean hands document, or it's out of compliance, it's out of date, and immediately shoot that back to them. That would make my life easier. My, again, grant load is a little bit more manageable than somebody that's getting hundreds of applications. So it would be even more imperative for the Art Bank program to be able to have that happen. It also creates accessibility for our grantees because they don't have to wait for us to get through all their documents to see what they're missing. And human error, you can always miss something. It would be instamatic, it would be instantaneous, I'm sorry, if AI could do that. And so as I've been taking more classes and learning more, I've been getting more ideas. So is Kerry Kaliba. And I think also our legal team is starting to get their heads around that it's going to have to be a group project. And as you know, working with organizations, the more people that are helping build policies and procedures, the better. Additional grants that come out of our office are Arts and Humanities Education Program, Arts and Humanities Fellowship Program, Capital Projects, East Arts Grant, Field Trip Experiences, General Operating Support, and Projects, Events, and Festivals. There's also a fellowship that's not on here. Again, they get hundreds of applications. So for Kerry Kaliba, figuring out how to make AI, or figuring out how AI can make our grant process easier and more accessible, is one of the things that we're focusing on, because again, that's the software that we can control. And one of the things I'm starting to slowly learn is we're gonna have to be able to pick softwares where we can actually get folks to respond to us when we find out, hey, we need this software to do this now, or we need it to detect when AI is being used. And we need to understand enough about data and how code is written so that we can, again, vet the information that we're getting. Other things that would be great if AI could do for us is reconcile fiscal reports. Some of us get hundreds of receipts when we have a report. Also, picking up bias in real time. We do bias training with every panel, but people, it's almost like it bounces off of them. And so if the AI could pick up bias and just send a discrete email to a panelist as they're talking and being recorded in a panel and say, hey, we noted these biases, that would be great, because as staff, we can't always point it out. We try to, The panels are their own animals. They are a selection process. So staff comments sometimes are not appropriate. But again, that would be a great use. But if AI is so biased that it's not even picking up those biases, again, then that's a way that's going to amplify oppression and non-inclusivity. So again, for some of our grants like Art Bank or public art building communities, people have to submit their work. And again, AI generated images. These are pretty easy to catch, but if you're looking at hundreds of applications, maybe not. And I generated these really quickly from deep AI. I typed in alligator with balloon. And then I also asked for architectural rendering of sculpture in the style of Larry Kirkland. Again, we need AI to be able to detect if people are using this in their proposals. So these would be pretty easy to detect and wouldn't be pretty competitive. But if somebody kept refining with AI and kept putting in more data, they could come up with much more slick presentations that, again, that could slide through. So again, these are the type of things that we're looking at with AI detection software that we're looking at. So privacy is a big issue that we're looking at. And right now we are in a surveillance state. And the police use of facial recognition technology is very sophisticated and very much being used now. And again, artists are starting to use that same kind of biometric data in their projects. Well, if you're an agency, you have to understand if you're served a warrant, you could be, or your artist could be, or whoever is that third party holding that data, it could be used for face surveillance. It could be used for searching stored video footage. Again, so you have to know what your artist is actually saving in their software and hardware. There is data mining from third-party stored images. So somebody could, get a facial recognition, and then you could start getting targeted ads. And we know how well that works with our phones because you can talk to somebody about something and get an ad for it very quickly. And facial identification. So again, there are legal ramifications depending on how artists incorporate facial recognition technology into their work. You have to understand it and your artists have to understand it. And then you have to figure out, and Sarah brought up a great thing, opt-in and opt-out opportunities, because maybe someone doesn't want their face in a project, but they walk by. How are you going to handle that? So again, these are all considerations that we're thinking about. This is a great project by Raphael Lozano Hammer. Listening Forest Recorded Assembly. And it's an amazing project, but it starts to illustrate some of the issues that we're discussing. So with this work, it consists of 3 monitors. And as a person walks across and gets picked up, the faces blur and combine into an ever-changing composite portrait. And as you approach, your likeness is quickly mapped and mixed with the collection of 600,000 previous participants to create an abstract and constantly modulating landscape of humanity. So as we talked about some of the legal ramifications, it goes back again to bias and how those images are being recycled and presented back to people. This is a great project. It looks like the intent is either neutral or positive. But again, the data and the algorithms could produce different results. How are you going to keep track of that? Those type of concerns should be stated in RFPs and RFAs. And then what kind of guardrails or the things that will protect your agency and the artist if some type of emergent behavior, which is behavior that wasn't predictable, starts to happen with a project. So again, as administrators, these are the things we should think about. Artists who use AI, I've got a list here of folks. Joy Bawalamwini is a MIT trained scientist and artist, and she was one of the folks who early on started looking at some of the issues with AI. So there's an article, and I've created links for the articles and references in this presentation at the end. So you can go in and look and see some of the different type of work that people are already doing. So again, back to data considerations. Google did an arts and culture app, and it again talks about where the data is that you collect. So when folks use the app, they would go through and data mine all the collections that they had scanned in and were using to create something close to someone's own image. Again, a positive, representation with a 59% match, because the data allowed them to use this and give a positive response. But another artist, Stephanie Dinkins, started to pull from GAN, the General Adversary Network on Google Colab, and she typed in prompts like a Black woman crying. And you can see from this image, obviously there were not enough people of color in those data mining, most certainly not of that person crying. And to me, this is a neutral or negative, more so negative kind of thing, especially if artists are creating things that people are seeing back and being reflected back to them, or even seeing, and it wasn't the intent of the artist. So then we need to look back at artist statement, and is AI creating works that are going to reflect to the audience what their intent was? And again, how do you monitor that as a arts professional? And you can see some of the same problems. And again, these are inherent biases in the data that is collected, not just with Google, but again, even just pulling across the internet. So an African-American woman smiling, a dark-skinned African-American smiling, or a woman smiling, because again, there wasn't enough data to pull from, or not enough positive data to pull from. And again, that's my own terms. I'm using positive, neutral, and negative, because it definitely is something for a non-technical person. I've got to be able to explain that if I'm talking to people who are writing code, or the people who are setting up these databases, about what my expectations are for work. And to show you how broad biases can be, one of the first articles I pulled up was from a librarian, and she's an African-American woman, and the title of the article was, "What Will It Take for AI to Fix the AI Bias Problem?" And her name is Jean Arnell. Well, I'm old school. I printed out the article, so I had a copy, even though, it's on the computer, but I'm of that generation, and went on and did other research. Well, when I wanted to pull that article up, I put in the title, and she didn't come up. I then typed in her name. She still was not listed as different articles for folks to come up. White man was first, a white man, then several white women, but she still wasn't I had to type in the entire title, year, and her name to get that article to come back. So again, that algorithm was working and not pulling up the data. So it's going to be the same thing working with data sets and understanding how you have to make sure you've got inclusive data sets.
Kerry, I hate to interrupt you because this is all really great. But it looks like we're halfway through your slides, and I want to make sure we have enough time for Sherry to share what she's got. And
absolutely, I'll go quicker, and it's not as many because some of them are research on the back end.
Thanks.
So again, these are different artists and arts collective that are using AI, and we don't want to stop that, because these are amazing projects that can be used. But again, what are the policies and processes? And also, if this was a proposal, it would blow most proposals out of the water. So again, you have to have those kind of considerations. Also, for retrofits, this project, Spirit of Freedom, was commissioned in 1998, and it's been retrofitted with QR codes, but somebody could pick up that little stanchion, take that, and put in new QR codes. And again, who's monitoring the data, and how is information or historical information being represented? As an organization, our grantees maintain it, but again, there should be some type of way to monitor it. So again, grant applications, chat boxes, or Chat GPT can be used to compose music, teleplays, fairy tales. write narratives, write poetry and song lyrics. And again, our fellowships support all of this, and all of our grants support all of this. So again, there are other considerations in our office. So staff considerations, staff and grantee considerations. We want to detect AI in renderings and design proposals. We want to see if it can support permitting. How is it going to work in outreach? How is it going to work with design proposals? Are we going to accept design proposals with partial AI? How can we use it in administrative paperwork? Can it automatically vet applications that do not have all mandatory documents? Can it ask them to submit missing documents? Can it highlight bias? Can it send milestones or invoice reminders? Can it reconcile financial reports or finance reports? So again, these are the type of things we're starting to want from a software. So for your own organization, education, working cross departments is one way to go. And I think a great way to go, because you get a bigger idea of what you're trying to handle or wrangle. Work on your policies, work on your procedures, get your evaluation tools, and get the ability to vet them. And that may mean you need to take some coding classes just so you can understand exactly how the code works. So don't ignore AI. Create AI policy, invest in safe ethical tools, ID when and what AI can be used for, explicitly state what it cannot be used for, educate and train staff. And I would also say offer workshops for your artists. And we're looking at that. We're looking at doing a survey, town hall meetings, and offering trainings, again, to make sure that we're creating capacity and accessibility in our community, and be transparent so people know what your organization is doing. And then I've also have links, a few tools to understand AI, librarians, bias and algorithms, organizations that work to help people understand, and Center for AI and Digital Policy, the Algorithmic Justice League, A Coded Gaze, are different organizations that are also working to help the average person understand AI. Again, a few tools to understand bias, and then legal considerations. So some on law, on the Fourth Amendment, and facial recognition, copyright and artificial intelligence, and some of the new California privacy and AI legislation information that's just come up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kerry. That was great. And hopefully we can include those resources in a follow-up because it looked like you had some good stuff there. And some really good points about things to be considering in developing those policies. And I can't wait to hear where it goes and what you and your colleagues come up with in the end. Sherry, do you want to share what you're working on?
Sure. Thanks so much, Kerry. Those resources look awesome. And we in Albuquerque are doing a lot of similar in-depth evaluation and analysis. And I just wanted to share three very simple samples of the way that we're looking at using AI internally to benefit the public art program, but also our artists. So behind us down the hall over here, we have 46 years worth of public art project files. About between 45 and 50% of that is digitized. So we have a long ways to go. But looking at that huge amount of material that is largely text-based with some images, but mostly documents, we're embarking on three different types of initiatives. So the first one is to utilize those internal documents to tell a factual, concise story of individual outdoor pieces of public art that maybe describes, how the project was selected or how the artist was selected, what site considerations went into place, so what that budget actually was. And this is a way of getting to a very short story about the project, as opposed to just sort of letting the urban legend around certain public projects keep going out there in the world, the stories that we've inherited instead of the actual factual stories. So we're working on 5 prototype models for developing basically very short stories about very specific projects that have their own sort of Yeah,
Yeah.
urban legend around them. Okay, then the next one is data analysis about the length of time of projects, cost for the projects, and analysis of other things like looking at the ratio of like the budget to artist fees, installation costs, and all kinds of other sort of general budget things that we can pull out of every project. And we're looking at using this data over those 46 years to be able to develop really good, solid, factual information that artists can use to help them build their own project proposals. So I will say with those first two initiatives, we have not put very much of our written data into an actual AI learning model yet. We're in the process of compiling all that information, organizing it, and putting it into a database that is managed and maintained by our city clerk, because our director of information technology has encouraged us to really get our data sorted out before we start putting it in there. And while all of those documents are, open to the public, open for inspection of public records, we are being very cautious to not include any imagery or original writing by the artist who made the projects. So no images of the public art would be going into that, and no original sort of prose or narrative provided by the artist. That way we're only using factual documents such as contracts, invoices, and other types of information. And of course, all personal information is redacted. But our third initiative is very exciting. We have actually taken a lot of public art data just with all of the murals that the city of Albuquerque has funded. Again, no images and no artist statements, just basic descriptions of the murals, the time frame of how long they took to do, and the size and scale and budget. And we have built out a what we call a mural proposal builder that only uses that information, and that is not scraping. It is only using internal City of Albuquerque mural information. And it is being used to generate text to help artists who've never done a mural project. And so Jacob Garcia, who's here with us, he actually developed the learning model, and he worked with our very first artist to do that, which our arts board and our city government has just approved, funding that mural proposal with full disclosure that his written proposal was done using the AI model. And Jacob's going to share just a couple points about that.
Yeah, so the whole idea of the project was to kind of just lower the barrier of entry. So just the art is the main important, because writing a proposal can be kind of an intimidating process. And so for this particular individual, it was a first-time applicant. He was intimidated by the public art process. And so he fed his design into our machine, and it wrote a proposal for him that worked really well. Talked to it a little bit to kind of fine tune it, and ended up with a proposal, and we sent that off to the art board.
Yeah, so very exciting. This artist, he walked in one day very down and sad and wanted to be a public artist. He walked out a couple of days later with a proposal, and the first time he's ever been funded with a project. So we're very excited about that. I will say that with the city of Albuquerque, with regards to policy, our city council has just established an AI policy study group, very much like what Kerry recommended. We are doing that, but ironically, it didn't even include the arts and cultural department, but we're making a change to that. We have our division, Public Art Urban Enhancement, has been approved to sort of dabble carefully, but we have not actually set any policy yet specifically for incoming submissions that, for either public art or for our grants applications. And that is partially why we're here attending this workshop. But we're also excited to see what our citywide AI policy group comes up with, because we know that, as Kerry mentioned, they're looking at a whole bunch of other uses, everything from, surveillance and police security to facility climate monitoring to, check the temperature in buildings. And so we feel like we're in a good place where we're actually taking the initiative to look at using it proactively as a way to help artists, and as Jacob said, to lower the barrier. So we're happy to share any developments in this area as we go forward, but and also happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Sherry and Jacob. That was great. So we've got just about 13 minutes left, which hopefully we can address any questions if people have questions. I mean, I realize people probably have questions. Do you have any questions you'd like us to address and answer today? And you can just go ahead and either unmute yourself and ask, or put it into the chat if you'd rather that we read it out. Everybody's an expert now, I see. No, here we go. When and will the AI become available for public use? Do you mean the AI tools that Albuquerque is working on, or do you mean something more general? Yes.
So the
Yeah,
mural builder actually is available.
it's on the ChatGPT store. There was a few models of them. I wanted to like test them out and like really fine tune it, but the best one that's on the GPT store right now is just the Albuquerque mural analyzer.
So,
And just to clarify, we have not launched it as an official city product. We're still in the testing mode, but it is out there. And anybody wants to look at it and use it, you know, give us your feedback.
it sounds like a really interesting project, and I think it's great that it's creating a structure for people who otherwise are intimidated or inexperienced with putting in proposals, and something that will actually work for people. I think that's a great way of including you know, a lot more artists, which is great. My concern as a lawyer, and this is not legal advice, my concern as a lawyer is that people understand that anything, and I think you've done a pretty good job of flagging a lot of this, but anything that you upload ends up becoming data that can be used by that model. It's really important to look at the terms of service and the terms of use that go along with every model that you're interacting with, because you want to make sure that it's something that you intend to upload and have available to other systems, or that you're working with a system that is not sharing that information and data with any other part, like it's not going to become part of the training set.
Yeah, we're still learning as we go, which is again why we're here at this workshop. But we did have a thorough conversation with the artist who applied and made sure he understood what he was contributing to the best of our ability to the learning model, and he signed off on it.
That's great. And I think I see also that I think Julia posted about an artist in town who's created their own AI model. So, you know, with the open source models, it is possible to create your own model that you can use for your own purposes. And so it's important, again, to understand where you're uploading that information, who has access to it, what's happening with it. But creating your own model may be one way, of course, to protect some of that. Jack has asked a question. Is there a requirement pending that all AI generated or partly generated images have a watermark or tag that tells viewers it was? That is an interesting question. I am actually working with a couple of different clients that are trying to figure out how to apply that technology. There are companies existing like Digimark and several others that already allow for and provide a watermarking technology for digital art. But how that becomes integrated into an AI model and how that's enforced through, through the AI generated images is going to be a very interesting question. I mean, we see in that Getty Images lawsuit that the watermark itself came through on the AI generated output. So in that case, it's pretty clear. But what we need to have is a system that allows for the actual content to be tagged in a way that would be discernible on the output side. This really gets to the question of how is the AI model using that training data? Like, are they making is it making copies of that information and then it gets reconstituted? The problem is that that's not really the way that it works, right? information comes into the system and it's broken down into component parts and distributed amongst the matrix that's being employed. Like, it's not a system where there is a direct copy of the work that's then being dissected and reconstituted before it's being output. So I'm not sure whether any of those pixels would end up on the output side anyway. Somebody who's more tech oriented is going to have to answer those questions. But yes, Jack, there are definitely companies that are working on trying to figure out ways to track data through AI models in order to allow for attribution, credit, and
Do you know what
compensation.
do you know what
The murals, let me double check.
Was somebody asking a question?
Sarah, it's Jack. Just to follow up, I was wondering if the government and world governments are coming together to require that, because if there isn't a global policy, we're really not going to be served by just having, say, U.S.
So there certainly are international conversations happening, but no, at this point, it's more of a race of regions where different regions want to become the front runners in terms of establishing that policy. The EU has been pretty proactive in having policies that they're working on, sort of following up on the GDPR, privacy, internet protocols. They're in actually a better position to be doing some of that. So there are international conversations. I'm actually going to be participating in one this fall in Europe that is international lawyers group that's looking at some of these issues. But yeah, I mean, it's very difficult to create policies that are internationally accepted. It would require some sort of international treaty that people sign on to. And then we also have to have the ability to require that tech companies adhere to it. So the US is actually in an interesting position to be leading those conversations, because we have the most tech companies in our country that are working on these models. So the short answer is no, there is no international agreement to work on these things. Yes, there are conversations happening. Whether we can actually get anything in place and protocols and guardrails in place before the tech companies are on to the next challenge is going to be, that's going to be the question, because both the court system and the legislative process moves way too slowly compared to the private innovation process. Corey Woodall has asked, does anyone have an AI policy for their municipality or institution they can share? So what I would suggest is that if anybody does, maybe post it on the PAC's website and make sure that everybody can access that, because that would certainly be interesting to look at.
Right now, the only policy or procedure that we came up with, because we are behind the curve, we just asked that in my RFA for my grant program, people identify if they were using AI.
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing a lot of, is the first step is just requiring that people are transparent about the use of AI and whatever it is that they're providing as a work product. Julia says, our policy is that if an artist uses AI, we talk to them about it to figure out how much input they've had into the image and at what points to figure out if it's copyrightable. We can't work with projects that have not had significant input from the artist. Yeah, I mean, we definitely have to go with that Copyright Office policy at this point, although, there's another interesting wrinkle, which is that the Supreme Court just overturned a long-standing law that allowed for agencies to interpret laws when there are gray areas. And so now, certainly in this instance, there's going to be some question as to whether the Copyright Office is even allowed to make policy that impacts this. And that's going to be a whole other can of worms that we're going to have to deal with. And I don't mean to harp on it, though I am rather obsessed with the election right now. There are going to be some very different paths followed depending on who wins in November. So unless there are more questions. Oh, let's see. For our public art artist roster RFQ application, we had a prompt for applications to disclose whether or not each image in their submitted work samples were created with AI. Yeah, and that's for the city of Oakland. That is really important. I mean, the big question, and I don't mean to be too skeptical of human nature, but the question is, are people going to be honest about it? And you know, that's something that I suppose we have to rely on people's honesty in large part anyway. We're asking for reps and warranties with, you know, with all contracts. But in this case, I think it's particularly challenging because not only do you need to have a rep and warranty or, you know, some sort of disclosure, but there needs to be additional indemnification or liability language that goes into that contract. So in the event that it turns out later that something actually was created with AI and it's not disclosed, there may need to be some additional ramifications for that that are spelled out. So it's a good starting place, but it definitely is just starting to, you know, unravel the entire question. Oh, Jen has posted not a question, just a chat comment looking at Artist Spaces, a newish social media platform for artists that y'all might be interested in is Kerry. Kerry aims to be a creators first social media platform that connects artists with clients, fans, and industry peers. The platform filters out generative AI images so that people who want to find authentic creatives and artwork can do so easily. I'd be curious to know how they're filtering it out. That would be an interesting thing to take a look at. I will look that up immediately after this. And yeah, I think we are going to see a lot of innovation around these issues and questions, and a lot of money is flowing fast and furious into this space right now because there is a lot of potential for, you know, all kinds of different applications. And certainly it's going to impact pretty much every aspect of our lives. So as painful and confusing as it is, it's really important for us to stay up as much as we can on the various, you know, the evolutions and regulations that are coming out that will impact not only what we do, but the rest of the world as well. So with that, I think we are at time. Would be happy again to have any follow-up. Probably best to post things on the PAX website. Or reach out. And thank you very much, everyone, for participating and joining us today. And hopefully we'll see you soon at another PAX event.